I'm live. Good afternoon. It is Monday, Easter Monday, and I am reading another of Joan Grant's book. I'm at the 7th reading now. It's called So Moses Was Born. It plays in old Egypt. It's a very long time ago. The story of Moses is a familiar one. He was found in the bulrushes, and Moses' upbringing in the court of Egypt gave him the influence and power to set the Israelites free. Joan Grant enlarges this picture by depicting the events that lead up to the discovery of the baby Moses, convincingly portraying the man she believed was his father, Ramoses II. And this is told through the words of his reclusive half-brother, Nebunefer. We are now Nebunefer and Sensen, his wife, have learned, and they know, that Queen Tua wants to have them murdered as soon as the present Pharaoh, Seti I, has died. He's very ill. And they are pretending to have been eaten by a crocodile. That was in the last chapter. The next chapter is entitled A Voice in the Dark. I found the tomb workers' lamps in a hut outside the entrance. One was still lit, by which the others in the morning would be kindled. The tradition which demands that the same flame shall live from the first day, when the reflected rays of the sun cannot penetrate far enough, until the final closing of the outer door, was serving me well. The wick spluttered and then settled to a small steady light as the oil warmed. The broad steps of the first staircase were partly blocked by sacks of stone chippings that had not been collected by the men who are not considered worthy to enter further than the first gallery. Even the workers on the royal tomb jealously guard their privilege. On the ceiling, vultures of Ma'ah spread their wings, and the power of Amen watched me from the walls. I felt very young and humble, for the boat of Ra reminded me that I had considered it a matter of supreme importance, that not I, but Ramoses, would stand at the steering oar of Seti's funerary barge. A temporary bridge, the split trunks of palm trees, crossed the pit that had been made 8 years earlier to carry away the water of spring which had risen after a season of heavy thunderstorms. This pit had been deepened as a further protection against those who might dare to desecrate the royal sleep. If my father believed, as he had so often told me, that death was as much rhythm of the gods as the rise and fall of the Nile, why had he made such elaborate provision to protect his body? Surely he did not expect even his car to linger here, the caretaker of an empty house whose owner has chosen a new estate. Or was it Tua who had insisted that it was his duty to leave in the living rock this impress of his power, so that men of the future might, in need, be reminded of the wisdom of Seti? I found it increasingly difficult to subdue my emotions with the whip of intellect. I was in the tomb of my father, and had come here alone and at night, because I felt he needed me for some purpose greater than filial sentiment. Fear touched my skin, insistent as the feet of blowflies, as I went through the hall of the 4 pillars. I remembered seeing the last of those 4 pillars cut free of the rock, and father saying to me, "They represent the 4 doors of the house of mortality: the east door through which a man enters into birth, the west door of death, the north door which opens into the underworld, and the south door through which the free man enters into the love of Ra." I had asked him why this could not be written on them, and he had smiled a little sadly and said it would offend those Amen priests who clung only to tradition, and be considered too blatant by the few who understood the reality beyond the symbols. Another flight of steps, a longer passage now. Now I was in the anteroom, in the antechamber to the hall of gold where my father's body would lie in his great sarcophagus, because the gallery beyond, nearly 200 cubits in length, would never be completed. A pale glow was coming from one of the offering rooms. I held the lamp high to see whether I had been frightened by no more than a chance reflection from the light I carried. I tripped over something which a careless workman had left in the doorway, and the lamp slipped from my hand. I was alone in the dark with fear so strong that I could not move even when the spilled oil licked my foot with a hot tongue. Like a child begging for reassurance, I said, "Father, can you hear me?" Though I tried to speak in a loud voice, a whisper rustled from my dry mouth. "Father, can you hear me?" I tried to believe I heard only an echo, but I knew another voice than mine had spoken. It came again. "Father, can you hear me?" Suddenly I knew who had spoken, and fear swept away by shame. "Yes, Ramoses, I can hear you. Why have you come to seek me here?" I was so jealous of his courage that I tried to break it. "Put out your lamp, Ramoses. Why should you be afraid of the dark when you visit your father's house?" I heard him gasp, and the light flickered, so I knew his hand was trembling. He failed to blow it out until his third attempt. "I'm very glad I came here to find you," he said, so calmly that I thought he had recognized my voice. Then I realized that my wish to speak in the manner of Pharaoh had become so deeply ingrained that my voice could easily be mistaken for Seti's. Would it not have been easier to talk to me in the palace? Until that moment I intended no more than to show him that his elder brother was even more self-assured than he. I hoped to forget my own cowardice in the pleasure of having so easily deceived him. "I tried to see you there, but Mother told me that your soul has already flown from your body, although your heart was still beating. She said that by tomorrow the physicians will have to admit that Pharaoh is dead. That's why I came here tonight, to make sure she's not lied to me." "Why should you doubt your mother's words?" "Because she wouldn't let me tell you about her plan. She made me swear on the crook and flail that I would never tell anyone living." "Yet you would tell me now?" I tried not to sound too eager. Was I about to be given proof that Ramoses thought his brother's life worth more than Egypt? "Of course, Father," he sounded surprised. "Now that you are dead, I'm not bound by my oath." She said, "Anyone living." "You are a brave son," and in that moment I knew that my jealousy of Ramoses had sprung from the same dark root which makes women envy the daughters in whom they have not the wit to see the renewal of their own beauty. In him were the qualities of leadership which I had longed to discover in my child born to Sensen. "I'm very proud of my son." And in my voice I heard the judgment in love of Pharaoh. "I'm not really brave, Father. I was so frightened when I entered the valley that I nearly turned back. It was much more difficult than pretending to enjoy my first lion hunt." I said, "I also nearly turned back. Only just in time did it relinquish the easy luxury of confession. Sensen had said, 'We are all pharaohs.' I would try not to betray her." "You mean the physicians are wrong?" he said eagerly. "I mean that I too found it difficult to visit my tomb. I can assure you that I have no intention of lingering here, so do not feel anxious about me during the 80 days' mourning." "Have you ever been afraid of the dead, Father? Before you were dead, I mean." "I wasn't, until Mother sent me to watch the embalmers to cure me of being sick. When I saw the entrails bulging through the slit in a man's belly, it was after one of the village people had clawed when he was driving a lion out of a patch of thorn bush. Of course I know she was right, for it had been Only the leader of 100, my men, would have been shamed if I had let them know I was afraid of seeing even foreigners hurt. Yet you were not afraid to seek me here, though I might have appeared to you as a corpse, not yet prepared for the decent obscurity of mummy wrappings. I was sure, or very nearly sure, that your soul would look almost exactly like you did when you were alive. I didn't understand that I would be able to hear you, but not see you. Father, please forgive me if this is a question I have no right to ask, but did you ask me to put out the lamp because you were afraid I should not like to see you? Why, I did think it easier for us to talk in the kindly dark, for the same reason that I used to draw the curtains when I came to sit beside your bed before you went to sleep. We felt closer to each other because our eyes could not remind us that you were a child, and I a man who had begun to realize that his muscles were not so obedient as they used to be. His sigh of relief was refreshing to me as cool wind to the forehead of a desert traveller. I am sorry that I let myself believe that death was frightening. You always told me that it was a trivial experience, to be feared only by those in whom Tahuti will be disappointed when you raise their hearts. I am sure Tahuti will never be disappointed in you, Father. Thank you, my son. Your confidence will give me added courage when Anubis asks me the name of the prow and the oars of the boat of millions of years, and your wisdom will increase mine when I answer the questions of the 42 assessors. Shall I tell you about Mother's plot right now? The eagerness in his voice warmed my heart. How good it was to hear his impatience to tell his story, even though he thought the audience was one of the illustrious dead. Surely it is this urgency that the gods long to hear in the voice of their children. You have my full attention and my profound gratitude for bringing me this vital news. 4 days ago, Mother told me you were going to die very soon. She made me promise not to tell anyone, because she wanted to protect you from all the people who would expect to be allowed a last audience. She said I must be specially careful not to let you know, otherwise your peace would be disturbed by having to comfort me. His voice became more confident. Mother said that even Neb and Karadan had not been told, but she could not trust me, because she had taught me to hide my real feelings. She might have been ashamed of me if she had guessed I couldn't help crying as soon as I was alone, but I did it in my boat so that no one would know. I deliberately pinched my fingers between the sail rope and the mast so that I had an excuse in case she noticed my eyelids were puffy. She said it was clever of me to sail as though nothing terrible were happening. It made me feel rather a fraud. But that kind of a fraud doesn't count with Tahuti, does it, Father? Tahuti considered such translations of mere facts to be a filament of the feather of truth, I said, with very real conviction. Is there more than the plot, except your mother's kindly wish to spare me the anxiety of wondering how my death might affect others? Much more. Then he paused and added diffidently, ought I to be as brief as possible? Why be brief? Eternity at last has the advantage of not being measured in hours. I thought it might be difficult for you to make me hear you, of course. I ought to have known. It would not be at all difficult now that you are one with the gods. In case he asked me some awkward questions, such as whether the voice Anubis sounded like a man or a jackal's bark, or whether Hathor mooed as a greeting, I thought it wise to show that Seti was still fully concerned with corporeal problems. I think I can promise that our conversation will impose no utter undue restraint on either of us. Why not sit rather than stand while we're talking? There's no need for formality. Thank you, Father. There's some straw here. I noticed it before. I blew out the lamp. I expect one of the stone carvers brought it to kneel on when he was doing the lowest bit of the wall. I heard straw rustle as he pulled it into a heap. Being dead makes people beautifully unremote, he remarked contentedly. I've always been so much in awe of you that I've never found it so easy to talk to you as I do now, which was entirely my fault. The fault was mine. How curious it is to find that death is also a cure for pomposity. Why were you shy with me? Because I wanted to be your favorite son, and although I tried to do what Mother said would please you, I was never able to think of the right thing to say when we were alone together. We were so seldom alone. So Tua had been too jealous even to allow Seti privacy with her children. For the first time, I realized how lonely Ramoses had always been. He had had no Sensen to share his childhood. Even before I went to the house of the captain, I decided I was going to lead your armies when you were too old to want to do it yourself. I never told you, in case you thought I was only boasting. I do boast rather a lot, especially when I'm shy. But I was going to conquer the Hittites if they became rebellious, and even set your steel beyond Babylon. Hatshepsut did, and she was only a woman, so I thought I could manage it too. One must not underrate women. They have a fund of subtlety which is difficult, when in a male body, fully to comprehend. I know, he said fervently. That is why I am going to marry Nefertari. You do want me to marry her, don't you, Father? She is nearly as good as I am with a throwing stick, and yet she is so pretty that when she asks me to do something for her, I can almost always manage it. I don't have to do it. I just like making her happy. I even let her steer my new sailing boat when the wind was so strong that Mother had forbidden us to take it out. She thinks it is weak of me to be so obedient to Mother. And I agree with her. Do you, Father? Oh, I wish I had known. Obeying Tuya becomes a habit, and habit is a bad overseer. You will, of course, give her the respect due to the royal mother, but you should accept her advice only after due consideration. Advice from Mother? Advice from Mother. You will find, my son, that when you wear the double crown, even Tua will not openly give you orders. The only order you will obey is the voice of your conscience, which, unless you deliberately cripple it, will continue to act as the honest messenger of the gods. Tell me, does Tua approve of your choice of a queen? She had to give her consent because I told her that I wouldn't agree to her plot, unless she also swore on the crook and flail that I could marry Nefertari before the end of the year. My respect for Moses continued to increase. Tua's power as the first woman of the two lands would be more difficult to sustain when Egypt had a new queen, and a queen who, for I had complete faith in Sensen's judgment, would soon be loved by the people, who had never felt more than awe of Tua. Nefertari will undoubtedly provide me with grandchildren, in whom I shall be greatly honored. If anyone tries to prevent your early marriage, I would remind you that the words Pharaoh has spoken are sufficient to make even a murmur of disagreement the confession of a traitor. You will find this usage a most comforting reflection when you have to make a pronouncement which is unpopular with some opposing factions. Does Nefertari play a part in the plot, except as a bribe? She wasn't exactly a bribe, Father. If I hadn't loved Nefertari, I would never have believed that Neb had refused to be Pharaoh. When Mother said that you wanted me to rule after you, I told her that I wouldn't believe it unless either you or Neb told me. A most natural and proper decision. How did she cause you to change your mind? I saw I was wrong after she explained. She said there was still a chance that you would recover. But if you started thinking about who would be the next Pharaoh, you would feel that you were ready to die. So if I said anything about it, I would be as wicked as though I had killed you on purpose. Your mother is a woman of remarkable subtlety. However, as I have warned you of that already, we need not labour that point. And what reason did she give you for not discussing the matter with Neb? She said that Neb loves Sensen even more than I love Nefertari. You once told me that no one can be loved more than they love, and the other way round. Nearly everyone loves Neb and Sensen, but I have only got Nefertari, and a boy who cut a bird arrow out of my shoulder when you wounded me by mistake, in the reeds, and my hunting dogs, the two who sleep in my room, and a soldier with one leg who looks after my horses. He was going to be sent home to his village after his leg had been kicked so badly by an unbroken colt that it had to be cut off just below the knee. But I made such a scene with the leader of his 100 that he was allowed to stay with me. Neb and Sensen both love you, I said gently, and you are my favourite son. There was a long pause. I heard a strangled sob. But I was telling you about Neb, he said, fighting for self-control. Sensen will never be able to have a child. I don't know why, but Mother says all the physicians are quite sure about it. Neb has refused to take a secondary wife or even a concubine, for he is sure that if he did, even for Egypt, Sensen's cough would get worse, and she would die. Mother said that if Neb thought that Sensen died because he had made her unhappy, he would become so absorbed in grief that he would be a worse Pharaoh even than the heretic. I couldn't go to Neb and tell him that I knew he had lost Egypt, because the gods didn't think him worthy of a child. Could I, Father? Mother had to explain how much that would hurt him before I understood. Neb once told me that if he were still childless after my death, he would take another woman with Sensen's full approval. Mother told me something else, which I wouldn't even tell you, Father. If you were not already with the gods, Neb won't take a concubine, because his seed can't be quickened. She told me last year, when I was 14, and she said it was my duty to prove to her that I was blessed of Osiris. She chose the girl I had to prove it with, and told me exactly what I must do. Being told by Mother was almost worse than having to watch the embalmers, but I didn't know then that it was right to disobey her. So when the girl was sent to my room, I pretended that I had done it often before. She was more frightened than I was, but I didn't know it then. I thought she was secretly laughing at me, so I pinched her arm until she began to cry. Then something horrid in me began to feel strong, because she was frightened of me instead of my being frightened of mockery. I never saw her again, but not very long afterwards Mother said she had protected me from yet another fear. There was a long pause. Unless you had told me not to obey Mother, I would not dare to say what I am going to say. So please forgive me if it sounds terribly impertinent. Between us there can be no need of forgiveness, I said, with fervour and hope that the gods would hear and shrive me of my earlier lack of understanding. Father, when you talk to the gods, will you try to remember that it would be good if men asked questions instead of only trying to think of the right answers? When Anubis asks you the name of the oars, couldn't you say, "You know the answer as well as I do, but why do ferry children to people who don't really want them, and forget to send them where they would find friends on both sides of the river? It might be very dangerous, Father, but even if Anubis were offended and left you in the underworld, surely one of the gods would hear about it and give you an audience. Then you could tell them how difficult it is to be human, Sometimes the gods seem like very wise parents who have been too busy thinking about more important things to have time to remember how it feels to be a child. You were too busy with Egypt to remember to tell me not to obey Mother. Perhaps the gods are too busy quelling rebellions amongst the stars to remember that the priests of their temples have forgotten why people are born. Why are they born? I asked in real humility. But, Father, you told me that when you said I must obey only my conscience, didn't you mean that we have to come to this side of the river to learn how to train our hearts to be true messengers of the gods? You are wise, my son. I heard him sigh. I wish that you had had lots of children, so that I could be sure that I was not going to be Pharaoh, only because there was no one else. I find it surprisingly easy to admit the truth that I had at last accepted. You will be a great Pharaoh, Ramoses. Neb would never have been more than a name amongst many. It is not Neb's fault that he hates killing things. He is better with a throwing stick than any man in Egypt. But if he doesn't enjoy wild fowling, how could he be slaughtering barbarians? I once saw him holding a dying gazelle in his arms. He had wounded it with an arrow, and he looked as I will feel when my favorite dog dies. Mother knows I love Neb, and she asked me how I could be so cruel as to make him choose between conquering our enemy and making their women weep, and not conquering them and seeing our women weep. Would not their men also weep? Or ours weep also? How could they, Father? You told me there is no sorrow beyond the great river, and surely even foreigners would not think of defeat until their bodies were dead. I asked him a most vital question. So, it is not because you despise me, Neb, that you're willing to dispose him? So it is not because you despise Neb that you're willing to dispose him? I love Neb. I can't lie to you now that you're dead, and we don't have to pretend. I love Neb more than I love you, but he has always been the person I would like to be. But I shall never be Neb. I'm ambitious, like Mother. I want to rule. I heard the catch in his voice, even when he spoke such bold words. Then why are you unhappy, son? Because now you are dead and Neb is going away with Sensen, there is no one I can really trust. It is lonely being a prince. But even fewer people are honest with Pharaoh. Mother promised me that Neb knew about our plan, and Mentu and the captain of the bodyguard both promised me she was telling the truth. I tried to believe her, even when she refused to let me say goodbye to Neb, or even to let Nefertari say goodbye to Sensen. Please, Father, don't be angry with me for not trusting Mother. I'm far from angry. Have I not told you that it is the duty of Pharaoh to see the color of the heart, and not hear only what is said with the mouth? When I hold the crook and flail, Mother will be my responsibility. I must know whether I can trust her. Sometimes she says things which are the opposite to what you say, such as telling Mentu that Neb has neither the wit to accept expediency or the strength to make it unnecessary. Of course, Mentu was pleased because he hates Neb for advising Karadan not to increase the temple tributes. You have not yet told me what arrangements your mother has made for Neb. That is what I came here to ask you about. At first, it sounded so reasonable, and then I began to be suspicious, and the suspicion grew stronger and stronger until I knew that I should have to break my oath if I couldn't make your heart hear me. Mother said that Neb would be afraid that people might sneer at him if they knew he had given up Egypt for Sensen. So he was going away for a year or two until there was no chance of the North making trouble because they didn't understand. Neb wanted to give the throne to me. She said it had been arranged for Neb and Sensen to borrow my boat, and it would be found capsized. Everyone would think that they had been drowned, but they would really be on their way to a place which is healthier than here, so that Sensen's cough will get better. It was only when the people began to wail in the streets because they had heard that the royal heir was dead that I suddenly remembered the way Usamento smiled at Mother when he was pretending to console her. She didn't know I was watching her, but there was something in the way she looked at him, as though they shared a horrid secret. His voice, which he managed to keep under strict control, grew shrill. "Father, did Tua arrange for Neb and Sensen to die? If she did, then I have murdered them. If she killed Neb so that I could take his place, I will revenge him. Even if it takes years and years, I will kill everyone who shared in the plot. Oh, please, Father, tell me what to do." When I heard his hard, difficult sobs, it was all I could do not to take him in my arms. I forced myself to speak with the authority of Pharaoh in judgment. "Ramoses, it is my wish that you take the crook and flail. There is no blood guilt on your forehead, the forehead from which will shine the golden cobra. You have taken nothing from your brother except a burden which was too heavy for him to carry." "Thank you, Father. Oh, thank you so very much. You are not even ashamed of me for crying?" "Is the warrior in the press of battle ashamed because he sweats? Remember, my son, that even when I have crossed the river and you do not hear my voice, I shall still be very proud to be remembered as the father of mimosas." His sobbing flowed into tears that were healing as water parched fields. Then in a small voice he said, "Father, could you give me a sign to hold on to? When I'm talking to you like this, it seems too unlikely not to have been only a dream. Mother has so often told me not to believe in magic that it has become a habit for me to distrust everything. I can't distrust everything I can't see or touch. I know he longed for me to kiss him, yet I dared not. Your heart will never forget what I have told you tonight. My flesh is growing cold, a clean, kind cold, like ash that has given its fire to light the darkness. But you shall not lack for a sign that you can see and touch. Wait here a little while, and be not afraid, for I shall be with you, although you will not hear my voice. It will be a preparation for the many times I shall give you counsel, perhaps in a dream or only as a sudden flash of insight. What does it matter now that I share your heart? Leave the valley before dawn, and at sunrise you will find my messenger waiting for you at the well of the 3 sycamores. To him you will ask the question, have I betrayed my brother? And he will prove that you are Pharaoh in truth. I shall try to sleep while I'm here, so that I may be able to see you. I'm glad now that Mother never let me have a light in my room, because it has taught me not to be afraid of the dark. Isn't it dark for you, Father? No, of course it isn't. Or you wouldn't be able to see the paintings on the wall. I heard the straw rattle as he drew it around him. Good night, my son, I said, and prayed until the sweat ran down my face, and he would find himself down my face. I said and prayed until the sweat ran from my face, that he would find himself in the arms of his father. So this is the end of the chapter entitled A Voice in the Dark. And the next chapter is The Well of the 3 Sycamores. Ooh, it's sunny. Bye-bye.